Welcome to CardsCast, a football podcast all about Woking Football Club. Through this podcast, you'll hear roundtable discussions, match previews and reviews, interviews, as well as us sharing our favourite memories of players, matches and seasons from the past. My name is Glen Harrington and I'm joined as ever by Jacob Greenwood to talk all about the latest goings on at the club. But before we get into it, remember to like, share and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts from. So, Jacob, this would traditionally be our March review, but given the hectic schedule, we've had 11 games since our last one of these, not including last week's special on the appointment of Jermaine Defoe. So I'll rephrase the question a little bit that I normally ask from what have you made of it all to, are you glad it's almost over?
Yeah, well, what a month! What a month that was. Yeah, crazy. Really, looking back, as you say, so many games, but obviously so much has happened in that time. I don't think we could have ever foreseen sort of where we would be at by now. So yeah, it's certainly been an interesting month. I think for those of us that have said things were getting a bit boring with the football and everything going on, it was certainly been an exciting month. So yeah, that's good. But the on-field performances, as we will come on to, very much feel like they're in the end of season category. So half on the beach, the weather's nicer, all of those kind of things. So yeah, it does feel like it's almost over, and we're probably due a rest after a long season. The supporters as well as the players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're feeling the results of that kind of quiet January, February, aren't we? With all the postponements, it's this is what happens when you talk about games moting up, games accumulating towards the end of the season, and I guess just grateful in a weird kind of way that there hasn't been too much to play for, because I think if the team were battling relegation or something like that, it would have been an especially challenging period when no doubt people are getting tired and such. So look, we will try and break this into a kind of a couple of sections, I guess, rather than review each game by game. Otherwise we'll be here until the start of next season. But I know we touched on it briefly at the end of the Defoe episode, but just be great to get your thoughts on the run of games that we had under Craig, Jake and Dale. 9 in total, only one defeat, 4 wins, including the double over Aldershot, which was obviously probably the highlight from their perspective. But I think we touched on it last week that it was a run that could have been even better than it was. If you look at the late goals that Boreham Wood scored, that Southend scored, playing against 9 men with Altrincham for sort of 10-15 minutes, you could have easily had 2-3 more wins in there. But a fantastic run, steered us well clear of relegation trouble, and kind of had us looking up towards a top 10 finish, which was the kind of stated aim at the start of the season. So they did a great job, didn't they?
Yeah, and obviously the club felt that the management team should have been getting more out of the players, and we've probably seen what that group was capable of. Obviously we saw it in parts earlier in the season, but I think certainly in that month it was like, if you sort of take the handbrake off, you can see what they can achieve. And I guess that was the exciting thing about going to a lot of those games in March, was that the team just gave everything, and even when they didn't win games, it was sort of like, it was even when they lost it in the chucked 2 points away in the last minute against Boreham Wood or something, it was still a really, really interesting game, full of drama. We got some goals, all of that. That's what people go to football for. They don't go for, a drab defensive game where you then end up just losing 1-0 or 2-0 anyway. So it was good to see the team sort of have a go. I think the players really enjoyed it. I think most of them are burnt out now from the schedule, and the fact that they gave so much in those games means that it's I think there's sort of nothing left in the tank, and I think you can sort of tell that. And the squad is thin because there's injuries and all that kind of stuff as well. So, but that's just what it is. But it was certainly it was just fun to go to football again and watch some of the performances, and that's what kind of football's all about. Some crazy games and goals, red cards for teams, and good results, and the derby and all of those kind of things. So yeah, certainly a brilliant month, and yeah, hats off to the interim management team. I guess sometimes they probably just simplified it and just said, go out there, give everything, play to people's strengths, and don't overthink it, and that's what we got, and that was really entertaining. So I think that'll definitely probably be people's highlights of the season. Will probably have come in the run. Probably there won't be too many others. Maybe there were some earlier in our unbeaten run earlier in the season, but yeah, it was nice. And I think the one thing it probably did show, though, is that some of the teams we played were considerably better than us. I think the Boreham Wood game, the Southend game, the York game, we were in the games because we kept it tight and we were hitting them on the counter. The Boreham Wood game obviously changed after 15 minutes when the red card came, but before that they were sort of all over us. But the other two games I mentioned, we were away from home. Nobody expected anything, and we didn't really trouble them, greatly. Obviously, we got the point at Southend, another late goal there, and then lost at York, but it was only 1-0, which is great, bearing in mind how many goals they scored this season. But you could tell there was sort of a bit of a golfing class between some of those teams and what we were doing. So, I think, going into next season, we're going to want to bridge that gap. But, for the meantime, it's just good to, go into those games. I know the pressure was off slightly by then, but, you go to Southend away or York away, or all of those fans there, and they're expecting a win. And, the team really gave everything in those. And I think they got the rewards from, those performances, because, no one wants to be sort of battered 5-0 or something in one of those games. So the fact we were in it for pretty much the whole game in obviously both of those ties, was really impressive. And although we didn't get the win, it was interesting to watch. So and also, as I say, it shows us probably where we need to be next season, because we've seen probably a wide range of teams in this run of games as well, where you've seen some of the teams right down the bottom, where you're thinking, these teams aren't great. Obviously we played teams like Truro probably before in our last sort of roundup, but Braintree as well. Teams like that where they just look like poor teams, and then you see the teams at the other end, and then there's some in the middle as well. So but yeah, exciting, and that's I think what everyone could ask for. And as you say, there's a blessing and a curse. The curse, it's sort of annoying, have nothing to play for at this stage of the season, but you would massively prefer that over panicking, checking your phone constantly throughout the game. Oh, has Brockley scored or something? What do we need to do? Oh, we've gone behind. It's just nice to sit there. Nice weather. Obviously, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on at the club anyway, so you can sort of have your attention elsewhere. But annoying not to be playing for anything, but maybe next season.
Well, I think after 2-3 years of fighting down the bottom, it will come as a welcome relief to a lot of people. A couple of observations from my point of view, particularly as, I guess, someone who watches more from afar than they do in person. I thought that, having watched almost all of the kind of last run of games, it felt like, particularly in those sort of first few under Craig, that the players really were coming out with a point to prove. We've certainly talked about it a lot, between us, even if we've not done it on the podcast. Some of the players that looked like they were really struggling under, or towards the end of the Ardley reign. Matt Ward is the obvious one that jumps out, but there are others too, whose performances have significantly improved, particularly in that sort of initial run of games, those first kind of 5-6 games where we were able to win more than we were drawing. And I think whether a lot of them were playing for their futures or not, they felt like they really wanted to come out and show what they were capable of. And some of the attacking football that we saw in those games, the Brackley one stands out, that sort of 10-minute spell and the 4 goals. Portions of the Aldershot game, there were some really good performances in there. I guess more recently, we kind of went from looking over our shoulder to probably the most optimistic people amongst the fan base, going, oh, is there a chance that we could sneak into the playoffs, which I think was always incredibly unlikely. But I guess the last few weeks have really highlighted the inconsistencies that have probably plagued us over the last 2 years. I was just looking back at the league table from last season. We drew the most number of games of anybody last season, and this season we have drawn the most number of games joint with Hartlepool and Sutton at this stage of anybody in the league. So we're well on track to retain our title for most draws. But we talk about the Boreham Wood game, the Southend game, where yes, we were playing teams from higher in the league with better quality players potentially, but having got into the positions that we did, you would have hoped that we'd kind of grind it out. And I guess that late goals have helped have hurt us kind of quite regularly this season. And I think there was a stat somewhere about kind of how few late goals that we've scored that have changed the results of games. I think it was just the Truro win until very recently, possibly the late goal against Altrincham as well that got us a point. But if you look at that tally, that's ultimately what's going to cost us, because the defence is up there with the best in the league. We're getting results. We've taken points off the best teams, but the lack of goals and the lack of being able to kind of grind out results is probably what's hurt us this season. And that will be the difference next season between us kind of staying where we are or taking that next step forward. And I suppose my final observation is just that the gap between the top 7 and everybody else is quite significant. And 5 of those are still going to be here next season. They might not all still be at the standard that they are now, but no doubt they'll go into the summer all wanting to be in and around the playoffs and the promotion opportunities once again. So it feels like while at our best, this team is very strong, we just don't see us at our best quite often enough. And it will be an interesting summer, particularly, with Defoe now in place, as to, what the makeup of the squad needs to look like if we are to bridge that gap a little bit, and we'll come on to that in a little bit.
Definitely, I think he actually made that comment. I can't remember if it was in his kind of general press conference to the media or if it was the in-house one that he did afterwards, where I think Jermaine had quoted or had said, that he had seen sort of the York game and maybe one or two of the others against some of the better teams and seen sort of what the standard is, and how consistent and ruthless you have to be, really. But the points totals for the teams up the top is crazy. And we've had it before where we've had 2 teams that are going to be on over 100 points, but even the rest of the teams in the playoff, there'll be teams that get really high points totals, and obviously, as you say, 5 of them won't go up. So yeah, it's been a really strong season, but yeah, you've got that sort of 7 teams at the top, 4 really poor teams at the bottom, and basically everyone else in the middle. And it's going to be a fight, not just between those 5 that are staying down, but I guess the ones that are not happy with where they are this season. Some probably will be happy with where they finished, and the budgets and those sort of stuff don't really mean they can't really kick on. So that they might not be. Again, they might just be looking for survival next year. But if you're looking to kick on, it's going to be tricky, because everyone's going to be looking to sign those players. And that always happens with the promoted teams as well. Obviously, we've seen Scunthorpe do really well, Boreham Wood do really well. So you can't discount teams that come up, and then obviously teams that come down as well. So yeah, it doesn't get any easier, put it that way. But hopefully the fact we've sort of been building this over, a couple of seasons now means that it's not what we've had to do in previous years, where it's sort of like get rid of everyone and sign a brand new squad. Hopefully we'll sort of see the benefits of retaining sort of like a core, and then adding, again, if Defoe's been watching us for a while, obviously Jody Brown's, that's his job as well, is probably seeing where those gaps are, and upgrading as well from, I think there's been a lot of sort of filler players this season. We signed this guy, he's a free agent knocking about, he can do a job. We've got this loan from, the bottom of League 2 or whatever, it's fine, they can do a job. It goes from that probably to, you need to be getting players that are going to push this core onwards, rather than all we've got being star players.
It's quantity as well, isn't it, as much as quality. You look at the squads up the top, they've got 28, 30 player squads. Maybe Forest Green, I think, have got about 62, but they're big squads that they're able to rotate, and the drop off in quality is not as significant as maybe it is for some of the teams further down the league. And just a stat, as I've got the league table in front of me, that Halifax, who are in 8th place and kind of the best of the rest, if you like, at the moment, are as close to Truro as they are to York in terms of points.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? When you just look at, how those clubs have sort of run away with it. And obviously York did really well last season as well. Got like 90 odd points, I think, and still didn't go up. But that can be I think that can work to our benefit as well. That those teams having big squads, because they won't retain everyone, and they you can pick up good players. I think that's what we sort of did. There were a few players I feel like in that Darren Sarll season, definitely people like Kellerman, where teams like Chesterfield were like, no, we don't, we don't really need you anymore because we've just got enough other good players. But he, for us, was then a really good player. So, I think that you can certainly benefit from that as well if players are, good enough for the level, and we think we can get something out of them. So, yeah, as you say, teams like Forest Green are great. I mean, there's no way they can keep that squad. That's just not sustainable.
I mean, I was going to suggest, I don't know how people would feel about this one way or the other, but I think there's every chance that Asude comes back in the summer. Whether it's on loan or permanently, the issue seemed to be with Ardley, who is now gone, and he doesn't seem to be getting more time. Certainly not more time at Forest Green. I think in his last appearance he was subbed on and then subbed off, so I presume that he's now injured. But I think he's only maybe got a handful of sub appearances so far, and doesn't seem to have made a huge amount of an impact. So it wouldn't shock me.
No, yeah, it wouldn't, and the money probably doesn't mean that much to them either. To be honest with you, they could probably cut their losses and say, "Oh well, we'll move on and just let him go or whatever." So no, but it'd be interesting to see, be interesting to track it. And yeah, Sude probably would have thrived in this. Well, certainly under the sort of Craig Ross and co management style of just go out there and express yourselves and attack. So he probably is a bit disappointed. But yeah, I mean the red card he picked up early in one of his first games at Forest Green, which there was a 4-game ban, and then he comes back and then gets an injury straight away. So yeah, certainly unlucky for him. But yeah, you never know. I'm sure he's probably still on the radar.
Let's just talk briefly about Jermaine Defoe's first 2 games. A bit of a mad one against Eastleigh, and then I guess the polar opposite against Braintree. I think my main reflections were that clearly 2 fairly indifferent performances, probably more akin to sort of Ardley era performances than what we've seen more recently. I would excuse them, quite easily by the fact that we were playing 2 teams that had something to play for while we didn't, and then also just for the fact that clearly Jermaine is rotating his squad, having a look at options, giving everybody a bit of an opportunity, trying some different things, trying some different formations and players in different positions. Matt Ward is a 10 on Monday. So I don't judge too harshly by the results, but any kind of reflections on Jermaine Defoe's first 2 games in management?
Not massively, which isn't great for the podcast. But what I would say is that he couldn't just do the same, right? You've come in, there's this big fanfare, and I think the 11 that started against Eastleigh was the same as the one that started on the Tuesday. So if you went for exactly the same starting lineup and did the same like formation and tactics, even if you won, people probably would have been like, well, we could have just kept the previous management team in charge if that's what we were going to do. So it felt inevitable that there had to be like some sort of tweak, some sort of changes. And I think we saw some like in-game sort of movements. It looked like at times we were sort of trying to play more of like a 2 up top rather than the 3, but we got most of our joy when we had the 3 up top, especially late on, with Pennant coming on and playing on the wing and causing problems. So little tweaks like that. And as you say, on Monday, sort of Ward playing more centrally, but was moving about quite a bit anyway. So it's sort of always hard to tell on those things. But yeah, now's the time to do it, right? You've got the chance to experiment and see what happens. I guess the sort of frustrating thing is that the season is so close to ending that you just don't. It feels like postseason friendlies more than it does actual league games, and it's a shame because I think it would be nice to have had at least a couple of games where it felt like we were, playing properly, so to speak, so that he could have sort of maybe put his stamp on it a little bit more. But I'm sure he's learning lots. He'll see lots on the training pitch, and I'm sure obviously he'll get a good understanding of who he wants to keep, who he doesn't, and then where are the areas to build on in the summer. And I guess that's sort of what it's all about. But I think it's fair that everyone gets a chance You know, a lot of these players seem to have been, you know, um, this season they've not kind of made a fuss about not playing or whatever. We don't really know what goes on behind the scenes, but it seems like they've all, chipped in, and there's been no kind of problem players or whatever. So everyone deserves a shot to get their chance, whether it's loan players or players whose deals end in the summer or whatever. So yeah, it's a chance to experiment, but I guess it sort of goes two way. I mean, it'd probably be, yeah, it'd be doubly nice if he could pick up a win, because I think if we sort of go to the end of the season and we've not won a game, that's, I'm sure, going to be a media narrative, which is just going to be annoying. But also here we just want to get that win as well, and then we sort of go into the summer and then from there. So yeah, not massively, not a lot of stuff to to take from it. And I think it's hard at this point of the season. You'd almost, I think we might have mentioned this on our previous pod, but obviously typically if managers come in and you've been in bad form, and that's why your previous managers left, and a bit like when Ardley came in, I guess when Doyle left, there was only sort of a week between the two. We played one Saturday, it was Doyle, we played the next Saturday, Ardley was already in, although he'd only been there like a day, but you saw that bounce immediately. Whereas when Jermaine came in, it was like, well, we've been playing pretty well for quite a few weeks.
Yeah.
So we weren't going to go to like another level. There wasn't really another level to go to. So the best we could have done is sort of just kept doing what we were doing. But the team sort of burnt out, and opposition teams have also sort of they have sort of given up. Braintree looked like they've given up on trying to stay up, which is crazy. But it's where we are with the season, isn't it, really? So I guess it's a little bit not harsh on the phone, but he just came in at probably not the best time. But I think he would rather that, and we would have rather that he came in when there was nothing to play for, rather than, if he'd have come in and we still weren't safe or something and he didn't win in his first two games, everyone starts to panic, and you just don't want that. So I guess it's fine.
Yeah, I am of the opinion that clearly the final four games, the last sort of month of the season, it's academic in many ways, but it feels like there is still something riding on it. The difference between 10th and 12th or 10th and 13th is not massive, but this is a bit of a sales pitch opportunity, I suppose, with three of the final four games being at home. And look, I know about the reduced attendance and all of that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but I do think it's important that we show some signs of moving forward under the new manager, and that he gets the sort of monkey off his back in terms of getting that first win, and like you say, preventing that from becoming an unnecessary narrative if he doesn't win between now and the end of the season, and it's 6 games into management without a win, and we've dropped from 10th to kind of 13th, 14th. It won't look or feel great. Hopefully, given particularly the opposition that we've got, no one really with anything to play for. Morecambe are all but mathematically down, and the other 3 teams will be mid-table come the end of the season. So let's try and get a couple of wins, finish as high as we can, and hopefully that will send us into the summer full of positivity and kind of optimism for the new season ahead.
Yeah, that'd definitely be nice. And yeah, some exciting games like the Eastleigh ones can do that as well, where all of a sudden the game sort of explodes out of nowhere, because although it's sort of meaningless, it becomes a bit interesting, because it's just a game of football at the end of the day, and it coming back late on or something, or coming from behind, or it just gets people going. But no, yeah, that would be good. But I think, to be honest, I think it was similar that season where Sale came in late after obviously Dowse had left during the season, and I think he won his first league game away at Boreham Wood, and although I think we did beat Wrexham.
I was going to say, wasn't the Wrexham win under Sale as well? That was
it was. But I think the Boreham Wood victory basically was like, you're safe, and then the Wrexham victory was sort of fun because it was the whole Wrexham thing. But then after that, it was similar to what it is now. And then obviously the next season after that, we were really good. So
funny to think how much times have changed since that Wrexham win. Hey,
yeah.
I remember jumping up and down, cheering in my kitchen when Jamal Oza scored, and now they're potentially going to be playing in the Premier League next season, which is a little bit mad to think. And I think Jamal Oza plays at about the ninth or 10th tier of English football, but there you go.
Yeah, things change quickly when you get promoted every season. It gets crazy. So, but then it just shows that can, I just remember going to a few games at the end of that season. I think we got battered by King's Lynn at home.
Yeah, I remember that
And it was just stuff like that. And it was just like, oh, this isn't really expected. Again, we expected what you were saying, where it's like, players would be playing for contracts and all this kind of stuff. But, it doesn't always happen. It does, you do it in some games, but not all the time. But, the positive from that is we had a really good summer then. And then we did really well the next season. So it shows that it can work. And gives Defoe a bit of a taste before he goes into what is quite a long summer in the National League. You break up at the end of April, and then you've got quite a big gap. So they'll have plenty of time. But it's nice that he's had that time to have some games, see the squad, do all of that stuff, rather than coming in during the summer when we've maybe already retained players or let players go, and he's had no sort of taste of it. So yeah, I'm sure. Well, fingers crossed. That's the glass half full version, anyway.
I guess just on your point around, Sal looking at his squad, working out who he wanted to keep, etc. I felt probably more relevant back then because, there may have been one or two under contract. I can't remember, but it certainly wasn't many. Whereas Defoe has inherited a squad where, maybe half of it is already known for next season, maybe slightly more. I think there's 8 contracted at the moment, probably a couple more that you would expect to be kind of givens if they want to stay. And the sort of continuity that we've got in place with Jody as director of football just kind of makes it a bit of a different situation. But we'll come on to our sort of who we'd like to keep portion of the podcast in a moment, given that we now know what league we'll be playing in next season. But just a quick word on the stadium stuff. And look, I'll hold my hands up and go, I know next to nothing about the situation that has led to this sort of 3,000 enforced capacity. My only observation from afar is that not for the first time this season, the communications out of the club could have been a lot better, which is never nice to see. It felt like criticism that was avoidable, let's put it that way. But just, given it's been such a big talking point this week, it would feel amiss to not say something about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame because obviously it came on, there was such like a crest of enthusiasm and optimism around the appointment. And especially when you want to pack the ground out as much as you can for that first game on Good Friday as well, when Premier League teams aren't playing. It's disappointing. But obviously, as you said at the start of the podcast, we're sort of ready for the summer. The players are ready for the summer. There's a lot of stuff to do off the pitch in the summer, this included, because we can't go into next season with sort of a capped capacity. If you look at teams like, obviously, we played Carlisle the first game of last season at home. Well, if you play them at home the first game of next season and the capacity was capped at 3,000, they would bring 1,000 fans. You only got 2,000 fans in the home end. Like it's just not very good. So,
it does feel very fortunate that we're playing Morecambe, Solihull, and Halifax, who have absolutely nothing. I know technically Morecambe aren't down, but they are. But barring a mathematical miracle, they are. So the fact that there's not a huge amount for any of those teams to play for. It's long journeys. One of them is midweek. At least we should avoid any, major PR disasters or any more. We've had enough this season, I think.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I don't. Obviously, you could have come out. But if they'd have come out before, I know there's a whole thing about they should have probably knew before the Eastleigh game all of this stuff. But I don't know what's gone on. But sometimes bad news is bad news, and I don't think if you come out before a certain game and say, guys, we've messed up so badly that we've got to reduce capacity, I don't think anyone's gonna be like, well, that was just great communication, I don't care anymore. I think it's just sort of, the bad news is bad news. The flip of the pitch and the postponements and stuff obviously did really cause a big stink, because there were people that were caught up in that, away fans and home fans, people traveling to games and making plans and getting to the ground,
and the fact that they did it twice in such quick succession and seemingly didn't learn anything from the first one. And I'm sure there's an expression about trying the same thing again and expecting a different result, but there you go.
Yeah, exactly. So it's must do better next season and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, but it would be a big season off the pitch. You know, obviously with recruitment for the team and all of that kind of stuff, but there seems to be a lot of requirements at the club sort of starting to stack up, to get, attendances back and the drainage of the pitch and the pitch itself and all of these kind of things. So it's all money that I'm sure, people like Todd don't want to be spending, but unfortunately, when you play in a ground that's probably not the most modern, to put it, in a nice way, then these things come up, unfortunately, and they probably never dreamt of having to invest money in that rather than, buying the latest and greatest players and doing all this stuff on the pitch. So, yeah, it's going to be a big summer, for around the whole club, I guess. And at times, I think, going back to that, I must stop talking about the Darren Sal season, but I remember him a few times that season saying, we've stepped up this season on the pitch, but off the pitch, we've not. We're still miles behind. Obviously, a year later on the pitch, we were terrible. So I don't really know what that teaches us. But both have to grow, right? If you're going to be a successful club that's going to try and push on, you need to be good on and off
The
the
whole
pitch.
experience, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, I think a lot of people, there were a lot of people there for the Altrincham game, which was a really exciting game. There was a lot of people there for the Eastleigh game. It sounds like there could have been more. People were getting turned away, but I think people that went to those games just really enjoyed them. It was just a good, really exciting games, a lot of drama, goals, red cards, all of this kind of stuff. And, people want to come back. So, yeah, you don't want to be turning them away because they won't be giving you too many chances. And obviously with sort of the faux bounce, you want as many people as possible to come through the gate. So, yeah, I'm sure it'll all be sorted over the summer, and then it'll be a distant memory by next season, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to finish, then let's do what is always my favorite exercise of keep or let go. A lot of players, as we mentioned, that are already under contract for next season, so it will be an easier round than it has been in the past. But I've got the Woking squad page on the website open in front of me. We'll do our best to sort of just look at first team players rather than the academy players that are included in this list. But if we take it kind of section by section, just to get your thoughts. So if we start with the goalkeepers first of all.
Yeah, is Will's under a, did he sign 2 years?
Sorry, I'll say I'll help you out with the contract.
To know the situation here. I'm not that big a fan.
So Will is halfway through a 2-year contract, and then Craig presumably out of contract at the end of the season.
Yeah, I think if Craig wants to carry on playing, then yeah, he might move on to another club. But if he wants to stay and do coaching or something, then he might stay. So yeah, I guess it's probably up to him. But yeah, obviously there's probably not going to be that many chances for him to play. I guess National League Cup and some of the FA Trophy maybe. But if he still wants to be playing, then yeah, probably won't be here. So it'd be good to see him stay, but understand if he doesn't.
I think there'd be something of a riot if Craig wasn't at the club next season in some capacity. It will, as you say, come down to what he wants to do for his career, whether he wants to transition into, being a full-time member of the coaching setup, or whether he does have aspirations of continuing playing at some level. For me, I think, his run in the side at the start of the season and the fact that he lost his place to a loanee while Jääskeläinen was injured kind of suggests that his time playing, at least in league games, is probably over. So, we talked about having a bigger squad available. I wouldn't begrudge seeing a more kind of up and coming backup for Jääskeläinen with Craig as sort of third choice / coach. But that's a bit of a luxury signing, isn't it? And backup goalkeepers are hard to find at the best of times. So I wouldn't be unhappy if it was the same again for next season. We'll talk about the defenders. So we've got Aaron Drew, Caleb Richards, who's had his contract extended, Chinwika Coley, who will go into the second year of his contract, Timmy Odesina, Tariq Hines, he'll go into the second year of his contract, and Tunji Akinola. I think it's been mentioned a lot, but quite a feat that we've got through the season almost exclusively just using 6, arguably 5 defenders, because Tariq's been used as a kind of versatile squad player. We've rotated the 3 centre backs. The 2 full backs have been near ever presence. Great to have a couple of them already signed up for next season. From my perspective, wouldn't have too many arguments with seeing the others retained either.
Yeah, definitely. I think we just need to. It might be that we bring in. I say depth, but probably some really strong competition. Maybe players that are starting, and then have more rotation in there. It's been crazy how many games players like Odesina have played this season compared to other seasons where he's really struggled to do that. We sort of got away with it a little bit, and I think it'd be good to see if some strong competition came in for those positions. I think it would be really good if we could retain them, and then get some other like first team starters in there rather than squad players. And I think we'd be looking very strong. But yeah, I agree with you. I didn't, if players want to stay, and I'd be sort of happy to keep them. The ones that we had kind of question marks around their injury concerns have sort of passed with flying colours this season, which has been I didn't see that coming at the start of the season, put it that way. So
yeah, I think I saw someone make the point on CardsBoard that it would be good to have an upgrade on a partner for Chin in the sort of centre half position, which makes sense. Would maybe be nice to have a little bit more experience in there. It's a very young group, and if you look at across the other positions, you've obviously got Craig as the experienced goalkeeper. Harry Beautyman, Dale Gorman in midfield, Jake Forster-Caskey, and then Aidan O'Brien, Jake Hyde as sort of experienced forwards, players that aren't necessarily going to play every week, but offer you that kind of experience. So that would probably be another thing that I would look at in terms of the defenders. But it's been 2 good seasons from a defensive perspective. The goals conceded column has remained low. And that's ultimately sort of what kept us up last season, and what's continued to see us do well this season, and that's with a lot of consistency in terms of Tunji, Tariq, Chin, Timmy that have been here for a couple of years now. So more of the same, I think. Moving on to the midfield, there's a long list, bear with me. So we've got Jamie Andrews, Harry Beautyman, Dale Gorman, Matt Ward, who is listed as a midfielder here, so he'll go into the second year of his contract. We've got Roy Silla, Luke Hall, Jack Turner, Timmy Akinola, who now has another 2 years after this season, Jake Forster-Caskey, and then the 2 loanees, Stephen Turner and Tommy Taylor.
So which ones are we just deciding on here? Because Ward and people are on 2-year deals, right? Is that right?
So yeah, Matt Ward and Timmy Akinola are the 2 that are definitely here for next season. Well, as it stands.
Yeah, so I think there's a few options in there. I think my one criticism of the midfield, pretty much throughout the season is probably it's been quite slow, not just in terms of pace, but in terms of on the ball and not doing things as quickly as they could have done. There's a lot of sort of samey players in there, and some of them as well we've signed. The reason we've been able to sign them is because they've had injury problems when they've been at a high level and ended up there. So I think we certainly need to take a look at some of those areas. I wouldn't keep all of them. It might be that we keep one of them. For example, if Forster-Caskey and Beautyman or something might be fighting over a spot where you don't keep both of them, you only keep one of them or something like that. But yeah, I think that'd sort of be the area not as fussed about. People like Andrews, though, I think has been good, and a young player, solid, and I think generally showing improvement and can be a good member of the squad. Again, similar to what we were saying about the defence, I probably want to retain some of those players and then build on it with real quality, rather than having people like Andrews as starters every single week and then getting in sort of loan players or free agents to sort of like carry the load around them. But yeah, there's certainly a drop off, I think, as you mentioned earlier, with areas of our squad compared to other teams in the league. And I think when you start, looking at people like Turner or stuff like that, it's when we start to rely on them, it sort of goes downhill a bit. So yeah, some tricky decisions to make in there. But I think based on injury records and the style of play, I think that probably the biggest area that I would be expecting turnover with this summer.
Yeah, I would agree. We'll discount the two loanees straight away. I think we could say with a degree of confidence that Luke Hall and Jack Turner, it's not worked out for, unfortunately, and we've barely seen Luke Hall. So you'd expect those two to depart. Timmy has obviously been head and shoulders our best midfielder this season, so great to have him tied down, and Matt Ward as well. I think of the rest, you could probably make a case either way for all of them, but you certainly wouldn't want to retain all of them as a group, if that makes sense. So as you say, it is probably picking and choosing, who is going to be the most reliable for you. I think, Gorman has come back from a long injury and has a interesting disciplinary record, but then has made a strong contribution through the sort of coaching setup over the last couple of months. For me, he's probably in competition with Jake Forster-Caskey as the kind of experienced deep lying midfielder. You've also got Roy Siller as well, who did impress me in the kind of 8-9 games that he had and was a regular during our sort of best run of the season, but he's just played so little football for someone that's almost 26 years old. So you do wonder if he's going to be as reliable as what you would want him to be. So for me, it's probably one of those three, and then you're looking at Jamie Andrews and Harry Beautyman. Jamie Andrews, I know, gets a fair amount of criticism, but for me, he's played 100 games in 2 seasons. He's still only 23. I am seeing improvement from the player that he was 2 years ago. So I would want to see him retained, at least in a sort of squad player role. And then Beautyman, I know that he kind of drifts in and out of games, but look, he's going to get double figures for the 2nd season in a row. Club captain, I think there's a role still for him, albeit, as you say, probably not as a starter. So that would be it for me. I would add Andrews and Beautyman as squad players, and then probably keep max one of Gorman, Siller, and Forster-Caskey, and then look at adding some depth and some quality to that group to try and push us on. Talk about the forwards. So we've got Aidan O'Brien on the 2nd year of his contract. Jake Hyde, who you assume is now a sort of full-time coach. There doesn't seem to be any further conversation of him being used in a playing role. You've got Sam Ashford, and then a lot of loanees. So you've got Josh Kelly, who we've obviously not seen for some time through injury. Joe Gabodi, who has another year left on his contract with Luton. Louis Flower, and Ollie Sanderson, who is, I believe, out of contract with Fulham, possibly has a year option on his contract. Will remain to be seen whether he's available in the summer. And then Cian Pennant, who was a recent arrival and almost sort of feels like he's on trial from the comments that were made about him in his signing press release. This is probably the area I think most would agree that needs some work. We've had some joy this season with particularly Sanderson, Kelly, and most recently Gabodi, but all loan players. And assuming that none of them are going to be here next season, that's going to leave us with quite a gap to fill.
Yeah, definitely. That's been the story of the season, isn't it? It's having a lot of loan players up front, which is which sort of makes this an interesting, even more sort of interesting exercise, really, because you've got to discount so many players that are probably not going to be here. Even players like Gabodi, who it's like, if you even if we wanted to keep him and he wanted to stay, the amount of money that's going to be involved in getting him to the club after people have paid I think Luton have paid a big fee for him. Like, it's
£300,000, I think I read.
Yeah, so it's like, even if it was half price, it's like far too much for us, I think. So yeah, it's really tricky. You know, someone like Sanderson will have his sights set on the EFL, I'm sure, and we'll be trialing, I'm sure, at other clubs. So yeah, it's gonna be a really tricky one. You know, someone like Kelly, you know, could possibly end up here or something. But I think again, that's another area of the pitch where I think we're going to see probably quite a bit of an overhaul this summer. But you know, I think we've certainly looked better when we've played 4-3-3 and had pace on the wings in these last few games, and that certainly looks like Jermaine wants to sort of keep that going. So I think, you know, we might see us go out there and yeah, earlier in the season when we were playing kind of 5-3-2 and stuff, I was really jealous of teams that were turning up with pace on the wings and causing us problems. So, you know, I think that's an area that I'd like to see it. But yeah, I mean, getting goal scorers at this level or at any level is probably the trickiest part. And we did really well with Sanderson this season. So you know, we'll have to see what we can do next season. But yeah, you know, players, you know, the players that aren't on loan, you know, Pennant, for example, I don't think would stay. Yeah, I just don't think he's of the level. Probably maybe the level below is where he'll probably drop to next. So again, I think we're going to see some changes there. But brilliant to see Matt Ward back in good form because that almost feels like a new signing after what had happened earlier in the season. So you know, he's certainly one that I think we're going to see quite a bit of. It's hard to say with, you know, people like O'Brien, you can't really rely on, unfortunately. You know, had a bad injury record and it's continued.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably the 1-2 year contract that doesn't feel like it's worked out, unfortunately. And you know, I feel quite sorry for him because, you know, the injuries that he's had this season have been, you know, different to previous injuries. I think it's his shoulder at the moment that he injures. You know, and that's
more of a freak injury, right?
Yeah, you can't legislate for stuff like that. You know, it's he did a lot of work last summer to get fit and sign that 2-year contract, and you know his legs have stayed healthy, so it's just unfortunate. But as you say, if the formation moving forward is a sort of either 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 with pace out wide, it's kind of hard to see where he fits in because he's not a 9 that's going to score you sort of 20-25 goals, and he's probably not a winger at this level anymore because he's just not got the pace.
I guess we are wrapping up this podcast, so I won't start a brand new discussion now, but I guess it is interesting on some of the ones that we did offer 2-year deals to. I guess there probably aren't too many regrets in there. Ward did seem like one, but now has turned it around. O'Brien, I think it's probably been the worst out of all of them, just in terms of the fact that, you know, he was injury prone and he's sort of continued being injury prone. And, you know, I don't know, it's tricky. So, but then again, you know, we've seen when he has played, he does have that class and he sort of can play, you know, as a 9, you know, centre forward or whatever if he needs to, you know, can, you know, head it, can you know, do some good stuff on the floor. So yeah, it's always an option. So I don't think it's a bad thing that he's around, but I think that's always the tricky thing when you're handing out 2-year deals. You never really know what's going to happen. And also, actually, Coney at the start of the season, it was like, oh no, what have we done? But then obviously he just, you know, turned, you know, back to like he was last season and was quality again. So that was a worry for me earlier in the season, but I think they've all sort of worked out. O'Brien probably not, but I guess when you've given that many 2-year deals out, that being the only sort of question mark is you know, is not the end of the world.
Yeah, and we should mention Tom Dreyer as well, who I'm excited to see a bit more of next season. I was impressed with his little cameo against Hartlepool. He did well in the Surrey Senior Cup this season. I know that he's done well at Westfield. I confess I've not seen him, but I hear lots of good things. So you know, excited to see a bit more of him in pre-season as well.
Yeah, definitely, and good to see the sort of players coming through the academy again, which we've not had many of, sort of over the years. So, yeah, it used to be something we were quite proud of as a club, and then we sort of didn't really have as many. And you know, I think with the elite development setup and all that kind of stuff, it's been good to see some players, yeah, sort of start to come through again. So that's yeah, that's good. And yeah, I'm sure we'll need a big squad next season if we're in the National League Cup, whatever it's called again. Then we're going to need a big squad. So there's a lot of games early season, and then it doesn't get any better throughout the season because you have that, then you have the busy Christmas period, and then you start to have games rearranged and all of that kind of stuff. So even if he was fit at the moment, I know he's injured unfortunately and out until the end of the season, but if he was fit now and was back at the club, you could definitely see him getting minutes, and I think it'll be the same in pre-season. So yeah, no, that is a a bit of a good news story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can let us know what you think about the squad for next season and everything we've talked about today under the link to this podcast on Cardsboard or on social media, where you can message Jacob at Cardinals1887. But until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we will see you soon.